One of the earliest videos I ever made was my first ever top 10 video, aka my top 10 Tsundere characters from visual novels. However, keep in mind this was in the early 2020s, and now, 4 to 5 years later, I found enough new Tsunderes to make me want to remake this video. Though just keep in mind that I'm not exactly the biggest Tsundere fan on average, but the ones I do end up liking make a huge impression on me. Rin from Criminal Border is probably not one of the first characters you'd think of as a traditional Tsundere, but the more that I thought about it, she's a very subtle version of one. She starts off being very verbally harsh towards the main character Itsuki, especially since they're childhood friends. However, what I find is that as Itsuki gets deeper into the criminal world, Rin, while not openly affectionate, occasionally shows that she does care and feels bad for indirectly dragging him into that world. Naturally, she's almost never going to be openly affectionate due to her harsh, blunt personality. I think in this regard, it does make her a tsundere archetype. This might be a bit of a reach, but the development she gets by the end of the third episode makes me like her a lot more than my first impressions of her. By the fourth and final episode, Life Sentence, she straight up becomes the closest to being, I guess we can call, dere, in terms of them actually feeling like actual childhood friends, with them actually kind of resolving their differences. In a weird way, Rin is the only main heroine to not really feel like part of Itsuki's harem, since, minor plot spoilers, Rin apparently may or may not actually be straight. While I had some issues with the execution of the final episode, Life Sentence, I think that Rin's character development coming full circle in terms of her being much less of a stuck-up bitch and someone who's competent and blunt but more open and willing to help other people and take responsibility for the stuff she started was really nice growth to see. Rui from Fudamata Renai is one of the few tsunderes on this list who is simultaneously pissy for very good reason, but at the same time is low-key the nicest or most overtly caring of all the tsunderes on this list despite her grumpy attitude. Literally every character in Fudamata Renai is kind of an asshole in some way with very few exceptions, and while Rui is certainly the most openly blunt and direct character in the cast, can you blame her? Her closest childhood friend had one of the most overly dramatic family drama moments, which led to an equally overly dramatic friendship breakup, leading to said Rui's best friend becoming incredibly stuck up. Rui's sister is a typical obnoxious gremlin. Rui has a hobby that isn't openly accepted, with Rui being into cosplaying as a very quirky, violent magical girl series character, and the thought that she's actually helping a two-timing asshole of a main character for silly reasons should make anyone actually pissed off. That said, as said earlier, Rui is easily the most openly nice girl of the main heroines in Fudamata. Her finding people to share her hobbies with, like Layla liking the same series as her, is one of the most wholesome parts of the VN, and Rui's part in helping the main character now and some of the other characters take down the final boss, Yua, in a couple of routes are really fun and hilarious scenes. And while it's obviously a strange relationship, I can at least see why she would come to like the main character despite him being a two-timing guy who has a lot of psychological issues. While Ruri is not my personal favorite heroine from Fudamata Renai, that would be Kirame because I just thought she was the most wholesome girl even if she was kind of stupid. I could definitely understand the majority considering Rui the best girl because of how hilariously blunt she is, but at the same time willing to help people behind the scenes while still passionately taking part of her own hobbies. Airi Sena from Mashiro Iro Symphony is one of the older tsunderes I've warmed up to, embodying the classic tsundere archetype. I often dislike tsunderes for lacking a good or well-explained reason for their behavior, beyond appealing to masochistic male readers who enjoy verbal or physical abuse before getting to fix the girl. However, Airi's behavior stems from clear insecurities revealed early on, tied to her kind of complicated family issues and the discomfort of the school she's attending, transitioning from an all-girls school to a co-ed school. Her classic tsundere development feels natural, and her strong relationship with the main character Shingo sells the implied true heroine dynamic well. Shingo's outgoing, nice guy attitude complements her detail-oriented, no-nonsense personality with hidden emotional depth. While her route was a bit too slow-paced at times, I did like the general core of resolving her drama. Even Mashiro Iro Symphony's weird approach to H scenes where they try to emulate potential real-life issues like how a couple's first time can lead to problems such as hurting too much or premature ejaculation, which essentially leads to a fake-out H scene only to have the real one a little later on. This did not detract from the true heroine chemistry that made Airi's route worthwhile to read. Tsugumi Komachi from Ever 17 is yet another classic tsundere from an older title. She's an interesting case, as one could argue whether she's a tsundere or a kurere. For most of Ever 17, I thought Tsugumi was just kind of standoffish, especially in the kids' routes where she's more obviously Sunsun. However, when Takashi specifically gets closer to her, it brings her out of her shell, especially once you learn about her past. Learning about this really helps you understand why she's easily the most popular girl in Ever 17. Her deep development and role in the story tied together beautifully, with everything going on in Ever 17 as a narrative. Sadly, I can't say too much more about her without major spoilers, but let's just say, even though she's not my personal favorite character, I have my biases towards a certain quirky hacker girl who eats cabbage with ketchup, I won't deny Tsugumi is the best overall executed character, having a very memorable role in just about every route. And part of that is figuring out why she's tsundere, even towards other characters that are not her love interest. As far as modern tsundere heroines go, especially in moege, it's hard to beat Karen from Making Lovers. The interesting thing is that Karen mellows out quickly, literally by the beginning of her heroine route, only after a very short common route, to the point I almost considered not including Karen on this list. However, Karen is undeniably standoffish towards the main character Kazuma at the start, and you quickly learn why throughout her route, so I had to include her regardless. She has enough moments of getting legitimately angry at the protagonist in a tsundere style, but in an actual fun, Smee-like goofy way, as she's thankfully capable of joining in on the game's goofy, savage jokes instead of relying on cliche harem humor like physically beating up the protagonist. I ultimately like the subtle but nice development that Kazuma and Karen have, emphasizing the clear feelings they had for each other back when they used to go to school together. And of course, Karen's ending is the most wholesome in the visual novel, with the final event emphasizing developing her career. If you want a good example of a modern tsundere done well, especially one who is actually adult age and not in high school for once, you pretty much can't beat Karen from Making Lovers. Riho from Deardrops is a character I used to rank much higher when I first read the VN, but my opinion of her has lessened as I've seen characters who are generally just as, if not cooler than her, and more developed. However, I'd say the main thing that keeps her in the top 10 is that she's the ultimate punk, savage, take no bullshit type of girl. She definitely makes a strong first impression when she's openly vocal about her opinions on the bands she's trying to join as a singer, but is very much not impressed, especially when other guys try to harass her to come back. She retains some of this, I guess we can call bitchiness for a while, but I weirdly found it oddly charming. Her extreme bluntness and slow softening, while still staying true to herself at her core, led to my favorite confession scene in the game and her role in helping the main character Shoichi develop due to her being a fan of his music before the story started. That said, Riho doesn't really develop all that much, which is her biggest flaw. She's more of a catalyst for character growth in other characters, including for helping Shoichi get over his past trauma. I just wish she didn't revert to being more of a bitch again in the D2B vs Deardrops fandisc, where she literally dropkicks Shoichi when they reunite, just because she was jealous of him talking to Kirari from Kira Kira. That said, I did like her role in D2B, where she bonds with the main character from Kira Kira, Shikanosuke, as both are a bit more cynical compared to their significant others' more optimistic personalities. Kiriha from Sosaka Kanojo no Renai Koshiki was actually the catalyst for me making this list. She's a voice actress in a visual novel centered on characters who are hardworking creators like visual novel writers and doujin illustrators, and as noted in visual novel community discussions and polls, is generally considered the most popular heroine for good reason. She has a haraguro personality, initially coming off as super nice and friendly, but secretly being abrasive, blunt, and embodying a strong, independent woman archetype. This duality makes sense given the hard work required to be a professional voice actress, especially at her young age. Her tsundere traits emerge through the influence of the main character Toshiki Kagami, who starts as a fanboy of her radio work, but becomes the first person to draw her true character out of her shell. So Saku Kanojo's structure has the common route divided into 8 chapters, with each of the 4 heroines getting 2 dedicated chapters for their character development, in addition to their own heroine route, which continues their development and adds some romance. While on a personal level, I like Erida more as a heroine since she fits my quirky weird girl preferences, I'd say Kiriha probably objectively had the most consistently good development in the visual novel. Without getting too into spoilers, we get development related to how her drive to get into voice acting affects her relationship with her parents, how her feelings for Toshiki that she's trying to hide potentially impact her career, and most importantly, what could happen if a traumatic event affects her ability to do voice acting. While the visual novel seems to prefer the main character's childhood friend Aisa as the true heroine, the fact that the main character Toshiki clearly has a thing for black-haired girls, synced with Kiriha's radio personality that he was obsessed with before the story started, and their somewhat contrasting personalities influencing each other in better ways, could make a strong case for this being arguably the best relationship in the visual novel. Considering this is a visual novel tsundere list, I'd be remiss not to include arguably the most popular tsundere in visual novels. Rin Tohsaka from Fate Stay Night is, for good reason, arguably the most universally liked tsundere in visual novels, only behind Kurisu from Steins Gate, Though, minor spoilers, Kurisu is not on this list because I only watched the anime for Steins Gate and thought Kurisu was perfectly fine but not top 10 tsundere worthy. Unlike other tsunderes whose insecurities are shallow based on relatively benign issues or solely tied to romance, Rin's tsundere nature stems from the tough front she maintains due to her perfectionist nature as a top-class mage. Her behavior is shaped by the expectations placed on her in the Fate Stay Night series. However, like most heroines on this list, the main character's influence, Shiro Emiya, gradually reveals her softer side across all 3 main routes. While Unlimited Blade Works is the route focused around her romance, I actually found Rin truly shines the best in Heaven's Feel. In that route, she still slowly breaks out of her tsundere shell while interacting with a certain other important related character to her, creating one of the most emotional moments in the entire game. Hell, even in the first route, Fate, Rin basically comes to terms with calming down her pride of needing to win the war, and ultimately being a great support character for Shiro and Saber while still being a competent badass with a love of teasing Shiro but also getting understandably frustrated at some of Shiro's stupid decisions. Rin Tohsaka is just an all-around excellent character who happens to have tsundere traits that are more endearing and deep than generic, unfunny, or annoying. However, as technically great as she is, she doesn't fully fit my personal preferences for what I consider a truly top-tier tsundere main heroine in a visual novel. Yuri from Kunado Chronicles is one of the newest tsunderes I've come to love and is probably my single favorite purple soft character, which is saying a lot since that company has no shortage of extremely memorable heroines. What I like most about Yuri is that, despite being from a unique world with a distinct setting, she's by far the most grounded character in Kunado, with relatable personal development. She starts off as someone who keeps herself distant and can be quite harsh towards the main character, but eventually becomes her own person and has some pretty cool fight scenes. The fact that she gets solid emotional depth in both her main and side routes is very nice to see. Plus points for her romance, which is surprisingly well done. I like that she's the one heroine that takes the most advantage of the fact that apparently in the Kunado universe, the women are supposed to be the ones that take charge of a relationship, kind of a reverse gender stereotype in real life. And the way she took advantage of that was most charming to me at least. As a classic tsundere, she starts off angry at the main character, though admittedly for good reason, but her growth to like him actually makes sense. Even her role in other chapters is great to see, as she embraces being one of the most physically powerful people in the city. It's just a shame she suffers from first heroine syndrome in a ladder route structured visual novel. She definitely peaks early in both her main and side routes, but doesn't get to do too much else afterwards. Thankfully, the impact she made was still really great regardless. My personal favorite visual novel tsundere heroine, one that has not changed since my last video, is Kazusa Sakaki from the relatively underrated moege Under One Wing, developed by the long-dead Harmorize. To me, she should be the standard of what tsundere should be in visual novels, someone who still has the classic anger and insecurities but is surprisingly reasonable, especially in accidental pervert situations where normally the girl would tend to unfairly beat up the protagonist when he's not at fault. Kazusa never does that. She's extremely fair and understanding, especially considering she's the one with the comedic gimmick of rolling in her sleep, which causes lewd situations. Make no mistake though, she's very much a tsundere. She starts off understandably wary of the protagonist due to a dumb coincidence. They just happen to share a last name and end up having to share a room together due to a mix-up and a lack of rooms in a dorm. But this does actually make it so the main character, Junichi, actually has the most natural relationship with Kazusa, as they have the most slice-of-life interactions in the common route due to sharing a room. Kazusa probably has the best overall emotional development in her own heroine route as well, even if it's a bit rushed. While Kazusa might not be the most badass or the most deep heroine, she's by far the most likable while still being undeniably a tsundere main heroine. As I said, I think she should be the standard for tsunderes, and that's why she's my #1 favorite tsundere visual novel heroine. And that wraps up my top 10 visual novel tsundere heroines. I probably have a lot of weird takes, and I know I definitely did not list a few particularly popular tsunderes like Ash from Wagamama High Spec or Kurisu from Steins Gate. What are your thoughts on the tsunderes I chose, and what are your favorite tsunderes in visual novels? Feel free to leave a comment below.